The eighth hour of the evening in the house on Spruce Street went on as usual. I sat in a chair by the window with a volume of Jack London that I was rereading for the third time in the last 6 months. The light from the table lamp fell on the yellowed pages, creating a cozy island in the living room's cool twilight. Outside the window, the orange trees planted by the previous owners of the house were darkening, and the distant sound of the freeway leading to the coast of Port Orange could be heard. David made his way to the kitchen, where Valerie was already busy preparing dinner for the children. Their voices mingled with the sizzle of frying pans and the clinking of dishes. I heard bits and pieces of conversation, but I didn't listen, accustomed to not being privy to the family's plans. Page after page turned under my fingers, but my thoughts wandered somewhere away from the adventures of the gold diggers in Alaska. Saturday at Rebecca's then, Valerie said, her voice with that special note that you hear when you talk about plans that might raise their social status. The barbecue starts at 2 o'clock, but you'd better get there early. David's whole management company will be there. Sure you can. Okay, the son said. What about tonight? A movie with Jessica and Mark. A new thriller at the multiplex. I already bought the tickets. I turned the page and caught myself reading the same sentence for 3 minutes. In the kitchen, the conversation continued about the weekend. Planning trips, meetings, entertainment. My name didn't come up once. It was as if I was as much a part of the house furnishings as the couch or the floor lamp in the corner. And the children? David asked. Tyler is spending the night at a friend's house. Emily is going to a party at a classmate's house. We're free. Valerie said the last words with a special pleasure. In 30 years as a geologist, I've learned to read people as well as rocks. And now in the voice of her daughter-in-law sounded the same joy with which one speaks of release from a heavy load. David came out of the kitchen with a cup of coffee in his hands. He cast a glance in my direction but didn't say hello, didn't ask if I needed anything. He simply walked to his office on the second floor where he spent his evenings at his computer. The steps creaked under his weight. The house was built in the 80s and was starting to show its age. I closed the book and looked at the family photos on the mantelpiece. Ellen was smiling at me from a silver-framed portrait, the same smile that had warmed our home for 47 years. Nearby were snapshots of grandchildren at different ages, David's wedding photo with Valerie, and an old photo of me from a university conference. All of these images seemed to belong to another life, another time when this house was a home, not a place of temporary residence. After Ellen died, I sold our house in Daytona Beach and moved here. David had said then that it would be easier for my family to look after me, that at my age I shouldn't live alone. Valerie agreed with a strained smile, assuring me that they wouldn't have any trouble getting me a room. But even then I could see her counting in her mind the extra expense and inconvenience. Valerie appeared in the doorway, holding a plate of dinner leftovers. Charles, I'll leave you a plate in the refrigerator, she said without looking in my direction. You can heat it up when you're hungry. Thank you, I replied, though I didn't remember being asked if I was hungry or when I was going to eat. She disappeared into the kitchen, and soon there came the clinking of dishes in the sink. I knew the sounds by heart. Valerie washed the dishes with the same methodical precision with which she crossed items off her daily to-do list. Every movement was precise and economical, without unnecessary emotion or effort. The door slammed upstairs. It was Tyler retiring to his room. 16 years old, all interests centered around video games and social media. He used to ask me sometimes about my work as a geologist, about traveling, about the rocks I brought back from expeditions. I would show him samples of quartz from Arkansas, mica from North Carolina, and explain how rocks form. His eyes would light up with curiosity. He would ask questions, ask me to tell him more. Now he said hello tautly and disappeared into his room as soon as the opportunity presented itself. Emily came down the stairs dressed for an evening out with her friends. 14 years old, already quite formed views of the world and her place in it. Short skirt, bright lipstick, cell phone in her hand as an integral part of her body. Mom, I'm going, she shouted toward the kitchen. Okay, sweetie, no later than 11. My granddaughter walked past me toward the exit, throwing a careless bye into space. Not to Grandpa, not to Charles, just into the air, as the rules of politeness dictated. Until a year ago, she would sit next to me and talk about school, about her friends, about her future plans. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, asked if it was true that rare animals lived in the mountains. I showed her photos from expeditions where deer, raccoons, wild boars were seen. Now all she was interested in was social media and fancy clothes. The door slammed and the house grew quieter. Valerie finished with the dishes and went up to David. Their voices came muffled from upstairs, but I could distinguish the intonations. She was planning something. He was agreeing. An ordinary family evening, with everyone busy doing their own thing, and me sitting in an armchair with a book as a piece of decor. 3 years ago, when Ellen was still alive, evenings went differently. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea and cookies she baked on Saturdays. Ellen would talk about her neighbors, her garden, the books she read at the library club. I shared memories of work, of colleagues from university, of weekend plans. The house was filled with conversation, laughter, plans for tomorrow. Even the silence was warm when we just sat next to each other, each with our own book, but feeling each other's presence. Now there was a different silence here. Empty, indifferent. It was the silence of an alien space where I was tolerated out of necessity. I got up from the chair and walked to the kitchen to get my dinner. A plate stood in the refrigerator, neatly covered with foil. Fried chicken, rice, green peas, everything nutritionally correct, nothing extra. No spices that I loved, no sauce that made the food taste better. I heated it up in the microwave and ate it, standing at the window, looking out at the neighbor's house, where the silhouettes of another family flashed in the lighted windows. There, someone was cooking dinner. Children were running around the rooms. Parents were picking up toys. Ordinary family life, full of hustle and bustle, but in that hustle was life, not a scheduled existence. I washed my plate and fork behind me, wiped it dry, and put it in the cupboard. Valerie didn't like dishes left in the sink. In general, she didn't like any sign of my presence in the house. If I was reading in the living room, she adjusted the cushions on the couch as soon as I got up. If I was making myself tea, she would immediately wash the kettle and put the cup away. It was as if she was erasing my footprints, returning the house to its pristine cleanliness. I went back to the living room and picked up the book again. Jack London wrote about people who struggled with the harsh nature, overcame difficulties, did not give up in the face of danger. His heroes were strong, independent, ready to stand up for themselves. I envied them. Their life was difficult, but it had meaning, purpose, dignity. It was finally dark outside the window. Streetlights illuminated the empty road, with the occasional car passing by. Port Orange was falling asleep, preparing for a new day. Tomorrow would be the same evening, the same silence, the same loneliness among the people. The morning began with the familiar noise in the second-floor bathroom. Valerie turned on the hairdryer, and its monotonous hum echoed throughout the house. I woke up at 7 in the morning, as I always did, whether I wanted to sleep or not. Years of geologic expeditions had accustomed me to early rising, a habit that had not left me even at 75. I went down to the kitchen and put the kettle on. There were eggs, bread, and some cheese in the refrigerator. I made myself breakfast, trying not to make any noise with the dishes. Valerie didn't like it when someone took over her kitchen before her, though she never said so directly. She just walked around all day with a disgruntled look on her face, rearranging things. David came down at 8:30, already dressed for work. Dark blue suit, white shirt, pinstripe tie. He worked for an insurance company as an analyst, calculating risks and writing reports. Boring work, but well paid. "Good morning," I said when he came into the kitchen. "Morning," my son mumbled, pouring coffee into a thermos mug. He didn't even look in my direction, concentrating on his phone screen. "Do you have plans for the day?" I tried to make conversation. "Work," David answered one-wordedly, tucking the phone into his jacket pocket. "Client meetings, reports, the usual routine." He drank his coffee in one gulp, burning himself, and headed for the exit. Not a word about how I'd slept, not a question about my plans, not the usual small talk. It was like I was part of the kitchen equipment that could be overlooked. "How are things going with the repairs on the garage?" I asked when he was almost to the door. "Maybe help with something?" David stopped, turned to me. There was a look of mild irritation on his face, as if I'd suggested something inappropriate. "Everything's under control," he said. "The foreman will be here next week." I could see what the problem is. My hands are still working. You don't have to. Better not touch anything. There was that condescending note in his voice that adults use to respond to small children who offer to help with adult tasks. David walked out, slamming the door, and I was alone in the kitchen with my tea. Half an hour later, Valerie came down to the kitchen. Her robe was pink, her hair was in a ponytail, and her makeup-free face looked tired and disgruntled. She walked silently to the coffee maker, poured herself a cup, and sat down at the table across from me. "Good morning, Valerie," I said. "Hello?" She nodded, not lifting her eyes from the phone. Her fingers ran quickly across the screen, scrolling through the news or social media. I finished my tea and got up to wash my cup. "How about helping with breakfast for the kids?" I suggested. "Or with the cleaning?" "No," Valerie replied, still looking at her phone. "I have my own routine. I understand. I just wanted to be helpful." She finally looked up and looked at me as if I'd suggested setting the house on fire. "Charles, you're already helping by staying out of the way. That's important too." The words sounded polite, but with an icy tone. I took the hint and stepped away from the sink. Valerie got up and began to prepare breakfast for the children, defiantly occupying the entire kitchen. Her every movement told me that my presence was unwelcome. I went into the living room and settled down in a chair with a newspaper. But I couldn't read. My thoughts returned to my conversation with my son and daughter-in-law. For 3 years of living in their house, I had grown accustomed to coldness, but today it seemed especially acute. At 9:30, Tyler woke up. 16 years old, tall and thin as a pole, hair disheveled, t-shirt with some rock band logo on it, jeans with holes in the knees. He went down to the kitchen, mumbled something unintelligible in response to his mother's "Good morning," and sat down at the table with a bowl of cereal. "How's school going, Tyler?" I asked, peering out of the living room. My grandson looked up from his plate and looked at me in surprise, as if he hadn't expected someone to ask him a question. "Normal," he said after a pause. "How was the math test? You studied for it last week." Tyler frowned, trying to remember what he was talking about. "Oh yeah, I did it. I think it was okay. I wonder what you're studying now. In my day, 11th grade was trigonometry." "I don't know. It's all kinds of stuff." My grandson finished his breakfast and got up from the table. Valerie watched our conversation with a stony face, and I could feel my desire to talk to her grandson annoying her. "Why don't you show me what you're studying?" I tried again. "I was pretty good at math, working with geological calculations." "I'm good. Don't need any help," Tyler said quickly and headed for the stairs. "Tyler is busy. He has a lot of things to do," Valerie intervened. "There's no need to distract him." Her grandson nodded gratefully and disappeared upstairs. Valerie continued cleaning the kitchen, rattling the dishes loudly. Every sound seemed to emphasize my unwantedness in this house. Emily was down by 9 in the morning, 14 years old, but she looked older thanks to her makeup and fancy clothes. Tight jeans, a brightly colored blouse, hair styled in a way that must have taken a lot of time in front of the mirror. "Hi, Grandpa," she said as she walked past into the kitchen. At least she said hello. That was something. "Good morning, Emily. How are you feeling?" "Fine," she replied, pouring an orange juice. "It's Saturday. Any exciting plans?" "Yeah. I'm going to a friend's house. Then to the movies, I guess." "What kind of movie are you going to see?" Emily shrugged, not really interested in the conversation. "I don't know yet. Something new." "I remember when you used to like animal movies. You and I watched a documentary about wolves." My granddaughter looked puzzled, like I was talking about something from 10 years ago, not 2 years ago. "Uh-huh. I kind of remember. What about your future plans? You wanted to be a veterinarian." "That was a long time ago. I'm thinking about something else now." "What's that?" "I don't know yet. It's too early to think." Valerie walked over to her daughter and put her arm around her shoulders. "Emily is going through a big time right now. There's a lot going on at school, with her friends. There's no need to burden her with serious matters." Her granddaughter nodded and quickly finished her juice. She kissed her mother on the cheek and headed for the exit. I'll see you later," she threw in my direction and disappeared out the door. Valerie looked at her daughter for a moment, then turned to me. "Charles, the kids are very busy right now. They have their own interests, their own social circle. There's no need to meddle in their affairs. I just wanted to talk to them, see how they're doing." That's understandable, but it's better to give them space. At their age, socializing with their peers is more important than with uh, the older generation. She didn't say grandpa or you, just the older generation, like it was an endangered species. They used to be more willing to talk, I said. Kids grow up. Their interests change. It's normal. Valerie wiped her hands with a towel and went into the living room, where she began adjusting the cushions on the couch. I sat in the chair, but she worked around me as if I wasn't there. Vacuuming the carpet, dusting the shelves, arranging magazines on the table. Every movement was precise and purposeful. Would you like some help cleaning up? I asked. No, thank you. I can do it myself. I've got time. You could vacuum upstairs or wash the windows. Valerie stopped and looked at me with the same expression she'd seen in the kitchen that morning. Charles, you should have a vacation. You deserve it after a long working life. You don't need to be doing housework. The words sounded caring, but the tone was as cold as a winter wind. She didn't want my help, not because she was worried about my rest. She just didn't trust me to do even simple cleaning. I see, I said and went back to the newspaper. Valerie finished cleaning and went upstairs. The house was quiet, only the clock on the mantelpiece ticking. I tried to read, but the words blurred before my eyes. My mind reeled with fragments of morning conversations. Cold stares, one-word answers. Outside the window, neighbors were gardening. An elderly man about my age was trimming a hedge, and his wife was working nearby, planting flowers in a bed. From time to time they talked, consulted with each other, laughed at a joke. The usual family idyll, where everyone knew his place and felt needed. I got up and made my way to my room on the first floor, a small bedroom with a single bed, a desk and a closet. On the desk were my old photographs from expeditions, mineral samples I had collected over the years. No one in this house was interested in them, but I couldn't throw away these memories of a former life. Picked up a piece of quartz from Arkansas, clear and cold. I remembered how I had found it 30 years ago in an abandoned mine, how happy I had been to find it, how I had rushed home to show it to Ellen. She listened attentively to the story about how crystals are formed, asked questions, sincerely interested in my work. Now this piece of quartz was just a stone in the hands of a lonely old man who had no one to tell his story to. The day passed in the usual silence. After lunch, I read in the living room, occasionally glancing at my watch. Valerie was busy all day doing her own thing, talking on the phone with her friends, planning something for next week. David came home from work at the usual time, around 6 in the evening, tired and silent. Dinner passed almost without conversation. The kids ate quickly, hurrying about their business. Tyler was discussing something with his friends on his phone. Emily was scrolling through social media. Valerie and David occasionally exchanged short phrases about work stuff, weekend plans, household issues. I wasn't included in the conversation, as if I was invisible. After dinner, the children went to their rooms. Valerie did the laundry. David sat in the living room with his laptop. I sat in my chair with a book, but I couldn't read. My thoughts kept returning to the morning conversations, to the cold stares, to the feeling of my own unwantedness in this house. Around 9 p.m., Valerie finished her chores and joined her husband in the living room. They sat on the couch across from me, but talked as if I wasn't there. David was showing something on the laptop screen. Valerie was nodding, making comments. I like this neighborhood better, she said, leaning toward the screen. Better schools, better infrastructure, and the status is completely different. Yeah, but the prices are serious, David replied. We have to calculate whether we can afford it. We can if we organize everything properly. We have reserves. I realized that they were discussing moving. They're looking at houses online, making plans for the future. Plans that I was clearly not a part of. The house is nice, Valerie continued. 4 bedrooms, big kitchen, 2-car garage. The kids will love it. It's a small lot, David said, but you don't have to do a lot of gardening, more time for important things. They discussed the details like people who had already made a decision and were now working out the technicalities. I listened, pretending to read, and realized that they were not talking about plans for the distant future, but about something concrete and close. When do you want to see it? David asked. Next week. The realtor said it could be any day, but it's better to hurry up. These offers are quickly sold out. Oh, okay. We'll go on Wednesday after work. Valerie closed her laptop and got up from the couch. I'm going to check on the kids. They're going to bed soon, she said. Ektonom. In the meantime, you think about the numbers. She went upstairs and David was alone, studying some papers on the desk. I kept reading, even though the words weren't forming into sentences. My thoughts swirled around the conversation I'd heard. A new house, a new neighborhood, a new life. Without me. Half an hour later, Valerie returned. The children had already gone to bed and the house was quieter. She sat down next to her husband and they talked about moving again, but quieter now, almost in a whisper. So when do we act? She asked. We need to think it through, David replied. It's a big step. We've been thinking for 3 years. It's time to get down to business. What about? David glanced in my direction and didn't finish the sentence. That's the problem, Valerie said even more quietly. We have to deal with it. They fell silent, and I could feel the tension in the room rising. Valerie stood up and walked to the window, as if checking to make sure the curtains were drawn properly. David gathered the papers into a stack, but his hands were shaking. Why don't we talk in the bedroom? Valerie suggested. Yeah, I guess so. They headed for the stairs, but halfway up, Valerie stopped and turned around. She looked at me with an expression as if she was assessing whether I could hear their conversation. I sank into my reading, pretending to be absorbed in the book. You know, she said to her husband, but loud enough for me to hear, we could discuss this here. He's not listening anyway. David nodded uncertainly. They returned to the couch but sat further away from me, in the opposite corner of the living room. Okay, Valerie began in a businesslike manner. We need this house. We deserve a better life after all these years. I agree. But the financial issue is complicated. It's not that complicated if you get it right. We have savings plus a loan we can take out, but it's not enough. What do you suggest? Valerie was silent for a moment, choosing her words. Then she leaned toward her husband and spoke very quietly. But in the silence of the living room, I heard every word. We have to get rid of that useless old man, she said. He's a nuisance. David shuddered as if she'd suggested something terrible. Valerie, that's my father. That's why you can't see the situation. Face it, he's taking the room we need, spending our money on food, medicine, utilities. And what in return? He's not spending that much. It's not just the money which is important. It's that he prevents us from living our lives to the fullest. We can't invite friends over because he's always hanging around. We can't plan trips because he can't be left alone. The kids are embarrassed to bring their classmates. David was silent, and I could see him struggling with himself. There was pain in his eyes, but also the realization that his wife was telling the truth. Where is he going? He finally asked. There are a lot of options. Nursing homes are very good now, comfortable. He will be better there. Communication with peers, medical care, organized leisure. I don't know, it's kind of cruel. Cruel is when we sacrifice the happiness of our family for a person who doesn't appreciate our efforts anyway. Did you see the way he was lashing out at the kids today? The way he tried to meddle in our business? Valerie spoke with conviction, without a shadow of doubt. Every argument was well thought out, every phrase hitting the mark. Hannah? Besides, she continued, there's the financial side. He still has the house in Daytona Beach, which he sold. The money's sitting idle in an account, plus a nice pension. Are you suggesting we take his money? Not take it, use it wisely. I mean, we spend it on his living expenses. It's only fair that he's sharing the expenses. David shook his head, but I could see his resistance was weakening. It's still wrong. What's wrong is keeping someone in the house who makes our lives worse. Think of the children. They need a normal family, not a miniature nursing home. What if he doesn't agree? Who's asking him? You're his son. You have rights. You can get guardianship if you need it. They say it's easy at his age. Valerie stood up and paced the room, as if she were thinking through the details of the plan. Look, she said, stopping in front of her husband. We're young. We have the best years of our lives ahead of us. Do we want to spend them as caregivers? Or would we rather get our lives together and give him professional care? Professional care is expensive. His money will cover the cost for a few years. And then we'll see. David sat silent, staring at the floor. Valerie sat down next to him and took his hand. Pooh. Honey, I know this is hard for you, but think about us, about our future. We deserve better. You're probably right, he said at last. But how do we organize it? I've already made inquiries. There's a good nursing home about an hour from here. It's not cheap, but it's got a good reputation. We could go and have a look. Would he go for it? What's he got to do? After all, this is our home. We have the right to decide who lives here. Valerie spoke calmly, without emotion, as if she were discussing the purchase of new furniture. For her, I was just an obstacle to a better life that needed to be removed. So it's decided? She asked. David nodded slowly. Yes, it's probably best for everyone. They got up from the couch and headed for the stairs. Before going upstairs, Valerie turned around and looked in my direction. In her gaze was the cold satisfaction of a man who had gotten his way. I was alone in the living room, holding the closed book in my hands. The house was quiet, with only the ticking of the clock and the creak of a floorboard somewhere. Valerie's words rang in my head like a sentence. Useless old man. Interferes with my life. I must get rid of him. Now I knew the truth of what awaited me. I stayed in the living room until late at night, unable to go up to my room. Valerie's words rolled around in my head like an annoying melody. Useless old man. Must be got rid of. Interferes with my life. Each phrase hit my ego, but what was most striking was the calmness with which they discussed my fate. It was as if they were not talking about a living person, but about old furniture, which it was time to throw away. The clock struck midnight, then 1 o'clock. The house was silent, with only the occasional creak of the floorboards on the second floor. David and Valerie slept soundly, probably having solved my plight in one evening. The children were asleep too, unaware that their grandfather would soon disappear from their lives. They were unlikely to notice my absence, though. I got up from my chair and walked around the living room, looking at the family photos. Ellen was smiling from the portrait, but now her smile seemed sad, as if she had a premonition that my normal life would end with her death. Nearby were pictures of grandchildren who had once delighted in my stories, but now barely noticed my presence. I went down to my room and lay on the bed without undressing. Sleep did not come. Valerie and David's faces, their cold stares, their indifference to my feelings, stood before my eyes. They saw me only as a burden, an obstacle to a better life. And what could I do against them? Protests? Tears? Reminders that David was my son and I had once raised him, taught him to walk, read him bedtime stories? No, times had changed. Parents were now becoming a burden to their children, not a source of wisdom and experience. A nursing home was what awaited me. A small room, hospital food, the smell of medicine and loneliness among the same forgotten old people. But gradually another feeling joined the despair. Anger. The quiet, cold anger of a man who'd been underestimated. Valerie called me a useless old man, but did she know that this old man had lived a full life? That he had traveled mountains and deserts, discovered fields, made money not sitting in an office, but risking his life in the wilderness? Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and turned on the desk lamp. I took out an old file folder from my desk drawer. Among the papers was what I was looking for, a certificate of ownership for a tract of land in the mountains of North Georgia. 120 acres of wild land that I had bought in 1978 when I was working on a geologic survey in those parts. It was an impulse buy at the time. The plot was sold cheaply because it was located in a hard-to-reach place without roads and communications. But it was not the convenience that attracted me, but the beauty of the place and what I noticed in the geological structure of the area. Signs that spoke of the possible presence of rare minerals. Ellen had shaken her head at the time, calling the purchase another of her geologist husband's fancies. But she didn't object. The money was mine, earned in expeditions. The plot remained untouched. I went there several times in the first years, set up a tent, studied rocks, collected samples. Then my work took me to other regions, David was born, and the wilderness area fell by the wayside. Once in a while I received letters from the tax office demanding payment of land tax. The amount was ridiculous, a few $100s a year. I paid it faithfully, without thinking about the expediency. The plot was my piece of wild nature, a place where I could be alone with myself. Now looking at the yellow documents, I remembered the details of that long-ago geological exploration. We were looking for copper and iron for a mining company, but I had noticed something more interesting. Signs of rare earth metals. Tantalum, niobium, possibly lithium. These elements weren't of much commercial value back then, but times have changed. Rare earth metals have become the basis of modern technology. Telephones, computers, electric cars, everything required these rare elements. Prices have risen tenfold in recent years. If my suspicions were correct, the Georgia property could be worth millions of dollars. But it was only a 40-year-old suspicion. I needed to be sure, to verify my hunches with modern methods. And for that, I needed an expert, someone I could trust. I remembered Robert Clarkson, an old colleague of mine from university. We had worked together in the 70s, exploring the mineral resources of the Appalachians. Robert was 5 years younger, but he was already considered one of the best geochemists in the country. After university, he started his own consulting company specializing in rare metal prospecting. The last time we met was about 10 years ago at a conference in Atlanta. Robert looked prosperous, talking about big contracts, working with Chinese and European companies. His firm appraised fields all over the world, helping investors make decisions about investing billions of dollars. If anyone could tell me exactly what my site was, it was Robert. But how do I get in touch with him? It had been too many years. He might have moved, changed jobs, even died. At my age, friends disappeared one by one, leaving only memories. I turned on the old laptop I'd bought a few years ago to keep up with the times. The internet was slow, but the search yielded results. Robert's company not only existed, but was thriving. The website featured his photo, aged, gray-haired, but still with the same energetic look he had 40 years ago. Contact information was available, but it seemed wrong to call the office. Too formal for old friends. I poked around social media and found Robert's personal page. A few photos with his grandchildren, posts about fishing and traveling, the usual life of a successful retiree who hadn't forgotten his roots. I wrote him a private message, trying not to seem intrusive. I reminded him of our work together, asked about his health and family. At the end, I cautiously mentioned that I would like his professional advice on one plot. I sent a message and waited. The reply came surprisingly quickly, in 2 hours. Robert was happy to hear from an old friend, asked about my life, shared news, and at the end he wrote that he was always happy to help a colleague and asked me to send details about the plot. I photographed the documents, drew a scheme of the area from memory, described the geological features that I had noticed 40 years ago. I sent all the materials to Robert and waited again. This time the answer came only in the evening. Robert wrote that the preliminary analysis looked promising, but that modern research was needed for an accurate assessment. Satellite imagery, geochemical analysis of samples, perhaps test drilling. Such work would cost about $50,000 and take 2 or 3 months. But what came next was something that made my heart beat faster. Robert wrote that the property was described as resembling a deposit in North Carolina that his company had appraised 3 years earlier. There, too, there were indications of tantalum and lithium. The deposit was bought by a Chinese corporation for $200 million, even though the site was smaller than mine. $200 million. The figure seemed unreal. I reread the message several times, making sure I wasn't mistaken. My abandoned lot in the Georgia mountains could be worth a fortune beyond the dreams of people like Valerie and David. But it was only a possibility, not a guarantee. I needed accurate research, and for that I needed money. $50,000 I had. Some of the money from the sale of the house in Daytona Beach was on deposit. Valerie knew about the money and planned to use it. It's only fair that he share in the common expenses, she said. I wrote Robert that I was willing to pay for the research and asked how quickly the work could begin. The answer came the next morning. His team could leave for Georgia as early as tomorrow if I transferred the advance. But there was a problem. How to explain a large money transfer to the family? Valerie kept a close eye on all her spending, checking her bank statements. $50,000 wouldn't just disappear unnoticed. On the other hand, why explain it? They were going to get rid of me, put me in a nursing home, and take my money. What right did they have to control my spending while I was still alive and sane? I got dressed, waited for the family to eat breakfast and go about their business, and drove to the bank. Valerie was surprised I was going anywhere, but I told her I wanted to check on an old buddy in town. She nodded absent-mindedly, preoccupied with her plans. Everything went smoothly at the bank. I transferred the money into Robert's company account and felt strangely light. For the first time in 3 years, I was acting on my own, making a decision that concerned only me. It was an intoxicating feeling. That evening, Robert sent confirmation of the money and the work plan. His team had already left for Georgia with equipment. The satellite imagery showed interesting anomalies in the soil that required detailed study. He promised the first results in a week. A week, just 7 days, and I'd know the truth about my property. Maybe I'll find out that Valerie is right and I really am a useless old man with no future. Or maybe it will turn out that this old man owns a treasure they don't even know they have. I went to bed with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation, excitement, a desire to act. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would no longer passively await my fate. If they want a game, they'll get it, but by my rules. The following days passed in a strange state of double life. Outwardly, I behaved as usual. Reading in the living room, going for short walks, occasionally trying to strike up a conversation with my grandchildren. Valerie and David treated me with their usual indifference, unaware that I had plans in my head that would radically change their future. Robert sent the first interim report 4 days after the work began. Preliminary samples showed the presence of tantalum and lithium in concentrations that made mining the deposit economically viable. But these were only surface samples. Test drilling was required for an accurate assessment, which would take another week. I read the report in my room, feeling my heart beating harder with each line. Robert wrote carefully, as a serious specialist should, but there was a growing optimism between the lines. The geologic structure of the site turned out to be even more promising than he had initially assumed. But even preliminary data gave me grounds for the next step. If the site really did contain valuable metals, I needed to protect it from possible family claims. Valerie was smart enough to handle the situation if the truth came out, and inheritance rights gave David a legal claim to the property after I died. I needed a lawyer, a good, experienced one to help me get the paperwork right. But where could I find one without attracting the family's attention? I remembered Harold Mitchell, who had worked as a lawyer at the university when I taught there. We were not close friends, but we maintained a professional relationship. Harold handled the university's estate matters, donor contracts, and executing wills from alumni. If he was still working, he certainly knew the ins and outs of such matters. An internet search revealed that Harold had long since retired, but continued to maintain a private practice. A small office in downtown Orlando, specializing in estate litigation and probate law. Just what I needed. I called him the next day, introduced myself, and asked for a meeting. Harold was surprised to get a call from an old colleague, but agreed to see me. We made an appointment for the day after tomorrow, Thursday, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On Thursday, I told Valerie that I was going to the doctor for a routine checkup. She nodded, not showing much interest. My medical stuff didn't bother her, as long as it didn't involve additional expenses. Harold's office was on the 3rd floor of the old building next to the courthouse. A small reception area, an office with bookshelves to the ceiling, the smell of leather bindings and old furniture. Harold greeted me warmly, offered me coffee, inquired about my health and life after retirement. We talked about old times, about changes at the university, about colleagues who were no longer alive. Harold had gotten older, his hair was completely gray, but his eyes retained the sharp glint of an experienced lawyer. He listened attentively to my request for advice and asked for details. I presented the situation honestly, not hiding the tense relationship with the family. I told him about the land plot, about the possible presence of valuable metals, about my desire to dispose of the property at my own discretion. Harold listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on the paper. "I understand your situation, Charles," he said when I had finished my story. "Unfortunately, such family conflicts are becoming more and more common. Children see their parents only as a source of inheritance, forgetting about basic gratitude. What can you advise?" "There are several options. You can make a will in favor of third parties, charitable organizations, university, museum. You can create a trust that will manage the property according to your instructions. You can gift the property while you are still alive. Which is best?" Harold leaned back in his chair and thought. "Depends on your goals. If you want to guarantee that your family will be disinherited, then a lifetime gift is the safest way. To challenge a gift is much more difficult than a will. And in favor of whom can I make a gift? Anyone. Private individuals, organizations, state institutions. The main thing is that the recipient must be legally capable and agree to accept the gift. I thought about the options. I didn't want to give to private individuals. It was too personal, and it was unclear how they would use the plot. The state didn't inspire confidence either. But the university, where I worked for 20 years, seemed to be a suitable option. What if we donate it to the university? That's a great idea, Harold said. Universities often receive plots of land from alumni and faculty members. If the land really does contain valuable minerals, the proceeds from the development will be used for the advancement of science. Symbolic and noble. How do you formalize this? Quite simple. We draw up a deed of gift, register it with the relevant authorities. The university gets the right of ownership, you remain the benefactor. If you wish, you can specify the purpose of the gift. For example, the creation of a scholarship fund in the name of your wife. I like the idea more and more. Ellen has always supported my work at the university, happy about the success of students. If the site really makes millions, scholarships in her name would help hundreds of young geologists get an education. It would be a fitting memorial to our life together. How long will it take to finalize? A week, 10 days tops. We need to contact the university, get their consent, prepare the documents, and register the transfer of ownership. Can we do this in confidence? Of course, information about the transaction will become public only after registration. Until then, only the participants of the process will know about the gift. We agreed on the details. Harold contacted the university's legal department, explained the situation, and received an agreement in principle to accept the gift. The university was interested in any donations, especially from former faculty members in good standing. 2 days later, I drove back to Harold's office to sign the paperwork. The deed of gift took up several pages of small text, but the gist of it was simple. The land in the North Georgia mountains would be deeded to the university free and clear. If minerals were discovered, the proceeds would be used to establish the Ellen Bradshaw Scholarship Fund. As I signed the documents, I felt a strange sense of relief. The site was no longer mine, and thus could no longer be the subject of a family dispute. No matter what the final results of the geologic survey showed, Valerie and David would not receive a dime from the property. When does it go into effect? I asked, putting the copies of the documents into a folder. As soon as it's registered with the land registry. I'll send the paperwork in today, and in a week the university will officially own the land. Harold shook my hand and wished me luck. His gaze was understanding. He knew that this deal was as much about family drama as it was about helping science. On the way home, I stopped by the bank and transferred the remaining money to a new account at another bank. Valerie knew about the old account, could access it if she wanted to. The new account was mine alone, and even the statements came to a P.O. box at the post office. At home, I behaved as usual, but now every word the family said sounded new. At dinner, Valerie was talking to a friend on the phone about weekend plans, David was reading work papers, and the kids were doing their own thing. No one was paying attention to me, and it wasn't frustrating anymore. On the contrary, I was grateful for the indifference. It allowed me to calmly prepare for my next steps. In the evening, I sat in the living room with a book and watched my family with new eyes. Valerie was planning on sending me to a nursing home, counting on my money. David was agreeing with his wife, betraying his father for the sake of family peace. The children saw me as an annoying nuisance that they wanted to get rid of as soon as possible. But what they didn't know was that their plans were already ruined. The money they were counting on no longer existed. The plot that could bring millions was now owned by the university, and the useless old man himself was preparing for a disappearance that would come as a complete surprise to them. Robert sent another message with the drilling results. The concentration of rare metals was even higher than the preliminary estimates. The site was indeed worth millions, possibly tens of millions of dollars. He promised a final report in 2 days. 2 days, then another week to register the deed of gift, and then we could act. I already knew what I was going to do when I got the final numbers. The plan was finalized. I just had to wait for the right moment. I lay awake at night, thinking over the details. I had to pack the most necessary things, choose a place for a new home, and prepare a farewell letter. A letter that would explain to the family what had happened and why. A letter that would be the last lesson for people who forgot the simple truth. You can't consider a man dead while he's still breathing. The last final report from Robert arrived Wednesday night. The figures exceeded the wildest expectations. The site contained lithium and tantalum reserves worth about $120 million. Robert wrote that several major corporations had already expressed interest in the deposit after rumors of the find leaked into professional circles. $120 million. I reread the figure several times, unable to believe my eyes. The piece of land I'd bought for $3,000 40 years ago had turned into a treasure. And now that treasure belonged to the university and would serve science instead of falling into the hands of people who called me useless. Robert detailed the prospects for developing the deposit. He estimated that production could begin as soon as 2 years after all the necessary permits were obtained. Annual profits would amount to tens of millions of dollars for 15 to 20 years. The university was receiving a source of funding that would sustain the geology department for decades to come. On Thursday, Harold's notice arrived. The deed of gift had been recorded. The site had officially become the property of the university. The deal is done. There's no turning back. I burned the paperwork from Robert in the fireplace, leaving only a small folder with copies of the major papers. This folder will go with me as proof that the useless old man was capable of doing things that will change the lives of many people. Harold also reported that the university has already begun procedures to establish the Ellen Bradshaw Memorial Scholarship Fund. The first scholarships will be awarded as early as next academic year, even before the field is developed. The university had invested its own money in the fund, expecting to pay it back once revenues from the site were realized. This news was especially heartwarming. Ellen always supported my students, inviting them home for dinner, helping those who were struggling financially. Now her name would be associated with helping young scholars forever. It was much better than dusting in a family photo in a house where she was remembered only on holidays. In the evening, I wrote a farewell letter. At first, it was a long text with explanations, reproaches, attempts to reach the conscience of people who had long ago lost the ability to sympathize. Then I realized that long speeches are useless. The second version was shorter, but still too emotional. There were only 2 lines left at the end that said all that was necessary. I release you from the burden of caring for a useless old man. Do not seek. Signed simply, Charles. Shortened to the point. Exactly the words Valerie used when she planned my future. Let them echo in her head now, reminding her of the evenings she'd spoken so frankly about my fate. Friday morning, I went to the bank and withdrew the remaining cash from my new account. Not all the money, just the amount that would allow me to get through a few months without too many questions. The rest of the money remained in the account as a contingency reserve. The teller, a young woman in her 30s, politely asked if I needed help with a transfer or deposit. I thanked her and told her I was planning a short trip. She smiled and wished me a pleasant stay. Simple human involvement that I was sorely lacking back home. On the way back, I stopped by the post office and closed the P.O. box. No more bank statements. No more official documents linking me to my old life. Charles Bradshaw, retired geologist and Port Orange resident, was ceasing to exist. I stopped at a bookstore in the afternoon and bought some books for the road. The salesman, an older man with kind eyes, recommended a new travel novel that had recently won a literary award. We talked about books, about writers, about how reading has changed with the advent of electronic devices. Just a normal conversation between 2 literature lovers, with no back thoughts or ulterior motives. In the evening, I packed a small bag, a change of underwear, a couple of shirts, a warm jacket in case of cool weather, documents, some cash. I left everything else here. Let the family deal with my things as they pleased. I took Ellen's pictures with me and a piece of quartz from Arkansas, the only memory of my former life. I put the deed to the property in my bag, too, not as proof for the family, but as a reminder to myself that old age doesn't mean helplessness. The family behaved as usual. At dinner, Valerie discussed weekend plans with the same energy she had put into planning my relocation to the nursing home. David studied some paperwork on a tablet, nodding occasionally in response to his wife's words. The kids ate in silence, engrossed in their phones as always. No one noticed my condition, didn't care that I'd barely touched my food. We're going to Rebecca's barbecue tomorrow, Valerie said to her husband. There will be a lot of interesting people there. It's good for you to show up, make new connections. They say the manager from that real estate agency we wanted to talk to will be there. Uh-huh, David answered absent-mindedly, not looking away from the screen. And there's a movie tonight, a new movie with good reviews. Jessica has already bought tickets for 9 o'clock tonight. Good, David said, finally looking up. What are the kids going to do? Tyler is spending the night at a friend's house, remember? And Emily is going to a party at a classmate's house. We'll have a whole day without the kids. Valerie said the last words with a special pleasure. A whole day without kids meant a whole day without responsibility, without having to keep an eye on anyone else. They had no idea that tomorrow they would have a whole life without a useless old man to take care of either. Plans for Saturday, plans for Sunday, an active social life full of fun and new acquaintances, a life that hadn't included me in a long time, but now it would become official. I listened to their conversation and thought about the fact that tomorrow they would be discussing my disappearance with the same indifference they were now planning entertainment with. Tyler looked up from his phone and looked at me. Grandpa, what are you going to do tomorrow? The question sounded unexpected. No one in the family had been interested in my plans in months. I'll read, I guess, I answered, or take a walk in the park. Yeah, my grandson nodded and stared at his phone again. A brief moment of attention, nothing more. But even that was nice. Someone remembered I existed, even if only in passing. Charles, don't forget to take your meds before you go to bed, Valerie said, clearing the dishes off the table. And if you need anything, we'll be upstairs. She spoke caringly, but there was no warmth in her voice. Just a duty like a nurse in a hospital. I was already on medication regularly. Blood pressure, heart, the usual problems of age. Tomorrow morning they'd find the untouched pills and realize something was wrong. After dinner, I sat in a chair with a book as usual. Valerie cleaned the kitchen, occasionally talking on the phone with her friends. David had gone into the study, from where the sounds of the keyboard could be heard. He was working on some reports. The kids scattered to their rooms. A normal family evening in a house where everyone lived their own lives. Emily came down to say goodbye to her friend before leaving. That's all for now, she said, standing in the doorway of the living room. Goodbye, I replied. Have a good time. She nodded and headed for the exit, but suddenly stopped. Grandpa, do you remember when you told me about the stones you found in the mountains? Of course I remember. Why? It just came to mind. A friend of mine has a collection of minerals at home, she showed me. They're beautiful. Minerals are really beautiful. Nature's the best artist. Uh-huh. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'll see you tomorrow. See you, I said, knowing there would be no meeting. Emily left, and the house was quiet again. Tyler went upstairs to pack for a sleepover at his friend's house. Half an hour later, he came down to say goodbye too. Bye, Grandpa. See you Sunday. Shiwa Joshondano. Have a good rest, I replied. He nodded and went out. The only adults left in the house were Valerie, David, and me. Strangely, the children showed more attention than their parents on the last night. Around 11 o'clock, Valerie and David went to bed. I waited until the last sounds in the house had died down and went to my room. I put the letter on the kitchen table, where it would be found in the morning. I hid my bag in the closet so I'd get it before I left. I went to bed dressed and waited for dawn. Sleep did not come. His thoughts revolved around the upcoming escape. Escape was exactly what it could be called. I was escaping from my own family, like a prisoner from prison. But unlike a normal escape, this one was not toward freedom, but from unfreedom to loneliness. An honest loneliness where you don't have to pretend to be loved. At 6:30 in the morning, it started to get light. I got up, took my bag, and quietly left the house. I left the car in the garage. It might have tipped them off. I put the keys on the kitchen table next to the letter. Let them sell the car if they needed money for a new life. I walked to the bus stop 2 blocks from the house. The morning was cool with a light breeze blowing in from the ocean. The streets were empty, with only the occasional passing car of early Easterners or people rushing to work. An ordinary Saturday dawn in a provincial town where nothing much happens. The first bus arrived exactly on schedule at 6 in the morning. The driver, a middle-aged man, said hello and didn't ask any unnecessary questions. On the bus sat workers rushing to early shifts, students with backpacks, a few retirees, ordinary people who were starting an ordinary day. No one paid attention to the gray-haired old man with a small bag who was looking out the window at the streets passing by. We drove past the school where my grandchildren attended, past the office center where David worked, past the shopping mall where Valerie spent weekends with her girlfriends. All of their lives were contained within a few blocks of a familiar route, and they had no idea that behind the windows of the bus was the face of a man they would never see again. The bus took me to the Central Terminal in Orlando, a large building with dozens of platforms, a scoreboard with flight schedules, lines of passengers with suitcases and bags, a world in motion, people going somewhere, looking for something, striving for something. I too became part of this world, not a spectator, but a participant. At the terminal, I bought a ticket to Miami, not because I planned to stay there, but just to get away from Port Orange. In Miami, you could change to another bus, train, or plane. Lots of options, lots of destinations, a freedom of choice I hadn't had in the last 3 years. The bus was leaving in an hour. I sat in the waiting room, watching the passengers and thinking about what was going on back home right now. Valerie was probably still asleep. Saturday was a good time to be in bed. David, too, was resting after the work week. The house was silent, unaware that one of its inhabitants had left its walls for good. He bought coffee at the terminal cafe and sat at a table by the window. The coffee was strong and hot, just the way I liked it. At home, I was served decaffeinated coffee. Valerie thought it was important to take care of my heart at my age. Maybe she was right, but now I wanted real coffee, the kind I'd been drinking all my life. At a neighboring table sat a young couple with a young daughter. The girl was drawing in her notebook, and the parents were quietly talking about their travel plans. An ordinary family where everyone knew their place and felt needed. I once had a family like that too. David was once a little boy who drew dinosaurs and asked me to tell him about rocks. The bus started right on schedule. The suburbs of Orlando flashed outside the window, then the open highway leading south. Orange groves, small towns, roadside cafes and gas stations. The ordinary Florida I'd known for years but saw now through different eyes. Not as a temporary landscape on the way home, but as a new space for a new life. With each mile, I was moving away from my old life, from a home where I was considered a burden, from people who planned my future without my input. Kilometer by kilometer, a distance grew between me and Port Orange that would not be bridged by a simple desire to return. On the road, I pondered what would happen next. There was enough money for a few months of modest living in a small town somewhere on the coast. I could rent an apartment, find a library, read quietly, and enjoy the solitude. A solitude that would be honest, not hidden behind the semblance of family life. The companions on the bus were making plans too. A young man with headphones on listened to music and leafed through a travel magazine. An elderly woman was reading a love novel, smiling from time to time. Students were discussing exams and vacation plans. Everyone was traveling to their own goal, and no one was interested in where anyone else was going. In Miami, I took a bus to Key Largo, a small town in the archipelago of the Florida Keys, a place where you could dissolve among tourists and retirees. The ocean, palm trees, and a quiet life without the hustle and bustle of big cities. Just what I needed, peace and a chance to go unnoticed. By evening, I reached my destination and rented a room in a small motel near the beach. The owner, a tanned man in his 50s, didn't ask too many questions. I paid cash a week in advance and got a key to a room overlooking the ocean. A simple room with a bed, a table, a chair by the window. Everything a person needs to live. For the first time in 3 years, I felt truly free. No one knew where I was. No one made plans for my future. No one called me a useless old man. I was just Charles Bradshaw sitting on a terrace watching the sunset over the ocean. Somewhere 200 miles north, my family would discover my disappearance. Valerie woke up late, went down to the kitchen for coffee, and found a note on the table. She read it several times, unable to believe her eyes. Called David, showed him the letter. They searched the house, checked the garage, called neighbors. Valerie must have been angry. Her plans had been disrupted by the unexpected antics of an old man whom she thought was gutless. David called his acquaintances at a loss, trying to figure out where his father might have gone. He called hospitals, police stations, even the morgue to see if anything had happened. But there was no sign of him. No one had seen a gray-haired man carrying a small bag. No one knew which way he might have gone. Charles Bradshaw had simply disappeared, as if vanished into the morning air. They thought I'd be back. Where would a 75-year-old man with no money and no connections go? Probably offended about something, walked around town and will come home for dinner with a guilty head. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, in a week at the most. I mean, where else would he go? But I'm not coming back. Never. The note wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. I was really relieving them of the burden of taking care of themselves. Now they could buy their dream house, plan their move, build a new life. Without me, without the extra mouth, without having to allocate a room for a useless old man. Except they didn't have the money for this new life anymore. And they didn't have a plot of land either. And the useless old man turned out to be not so useless when it came to serious decisions. But they would find out about that later. The week passed in increasing anxiety. The first 2 days, Valerie and David still hoped that I would show up on my own. They called the few people I knew, checked hospitals within a 50-mile radius. No one had seen me. No one knew anything. By Wednesday, it was clear that the disappearance was more serious than it first seemed. Valerie filed a police report, described her description, provided a photograph. The officer, a young man in his 30s, politely took down the statement but showed no enthusiasm. Elderly people went missing on a regular basis. Some lost due to memory problems. Others left deliberately. With no signs of violence, all the police could do was enter the data into the database and wait. "Are you sure he couldn't have left voluntarily?" the officer asked, examining the application. "Where would he go?" Valerie replied irritably. "He has no money, no friends in other cities. He's a sick old man who can't even walk to the store without help." The officer nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. The complainant spoke of the missing man as if he were a pet, not a family member. "We'll check all the usual places, hospitals, shelters, nursing homes," he said. "If there's any information, we'll be sure to contact you." David sat next to his wife and remained silent. He realized that the policeman was right. His father might have left deliberately. The note said exactly that. But to admit it was to admit that the family had driven the old man to despair. On the way home, Valerie said what she'd been thinking all these days. "He's taking revenge on us. Just revenge because we wanted to put him in a good place. Valerie, he's my father. So what? That gives him the right to ruin our lives? We can't go anywhere. We can't plan anything. What if he dies somewhere? We'll be blamed for not keeping a good eye on him." David didn't answer, but his face was grim. He, too, was thinking about the possible consequences. If father really died somewhere alone, it would look scandalous. The son had kicked the sick old man out of the house, and he had died in the street. By the end of the week, the family's anxiety peaked. Not because they were worried about my health or safety. It was just that the situation was becoming uncomfortable. Neighbors were asking questions. David's colleagues at work were showing sympathy that sounded like hidden reproaches. "Where is your father?" Mrs. Craig, a neighbor, asked when she met Valerie at the mailbox. "Gone to see relatives," Valerie lied. "Out of state for a while." "I see. I haven't seen him in a while. He usually took a walk around the block every morning." The neighbor was an intrusive woman who kept track of everything that happened on the street. Her questions made Valerie nervous. Soon the whole neighborhood would know that old man Bradshaw had disappeared somewhere. On Thursday, Valerie decided to be more systematic. She made a list of all the nursing homes within a 100-mile radius and started calling them. She introduced herself as the daughter of the missing man, asking them to check if they'd admitted a man with these characteristics. "You see," she told the secretaries, "my father has the early stages of dementia. He could forget who he is and ask for help. We're very worried. I didn't have dementia, but it explained the disappearance and made the staff sympathetic." Everyone eagerly checked their lists, but the result was the same. No one matching the description came in. After 20 calls, Valerie looked exhausted. She sat in the kitchen with the phone in her hand and a list of addresses, mechanically dialing the next number. David watched his wife and realized she wasn't doing it out of love for her missing father-in-law. "Maybe that's enough for today," he suggested. "No, we need to check everything. If he's lying sick somewhere and we're not looking for him properly, it'll look terrible." "That's right. It'll look terrible. Not, he may be suffering, or he needs help." Valerie was worried about the family's reputation, not the fate of the man. The kids treated their grandfather's disappearance with typical teenage indifference. Tyler had asked a couple times if Grandpa had turned up, gotten a negative answer, and wasn't interested anymore. Emily didn't mention my absence at all, as if she didn't notice anyone missing from the dinner table. They don't care, Valerie said to her husband when the children left for school. Their own grandchildren, and they don't care about Grandpa. Do you care? David asked quietly. What do you mean? You were the one who wanted to get rid of him. Now he's gone, and you should be happy. Valerie was silent. Her husband was right. She did want me gone, but not like this. She'd planned a neat move to a nursing home where I'd be taken care of and not cause any problems. And now the unknown was ruining it. It's different, she finally said. It's one thing to put him in a good place where he's looked after. It's another thing to have him go missing. We could be the subject of an investigation. That was what she was most afraid of. Investigation, questions, suspicion of mistreatment of an elderly relative. It could damage David's career, their social status, their future plans. On Friday, exactly a week after my disappearance, the mailman brought a letter that changed everything. A heavy paper envelope with the university logo addressed to the Charles Bradshaw family. Valerie opened it with curiosity. Who could be writing to them from the university? The letter was printed on official letterhead and signed by the rector. The text was polite but businesslike. Dear Bradshaw family, we have the honor to inform you that your relative, Professor Charles Bradshaw, has donated a parcel of land in Habersham County, Georgia, to our university. A preliminary appraisal indicated the presence on the property of significant rare metal deposits valued at over $100 million. In accordance with the donor's will, proceeds from the deposit will be used to establish the Ellen Bradshaw Scholarship Fund to support students in the Department of Geology. The university is deeply grateful to Prof. Bradshaw for this generous gift, which will ensure the advancement of science for many years to come. A ceremony to launch the fund will take place next month. Sincerely, Chancellor of the University. Valerie read the letter twice, 3 times, not believing what was written. $100 million, a plot she'd never heard of, an endowment no one knew about. And it had all happened recently, probably in the very days they were planning to send me to a nursing home. David, she screamed, come here, it's an emergency. Her husband came running into the kitchen, startled by the shout. Valerie handed him the letter with trembling hands. Read it. Read it and explain to me what it means. David read the letter in silence, then sat down in his chair, holding the document in his hands. I don't understand, he said quietly. Where did my father get a plot of land worth $100 million? And why did he give it to the university? Exactly. Valerie paced around the kitchen, waving her hands. Why? It's our inheritance. Our money. Technically, it was his property. He had the right to dispose of it however he wanted. Right? Valerie raised her voice. What about his family? What about grandchildren? What about our future? David reread the letter again, paying attention to the details. It says Ellen Bradshaw Memorial Scholarship Fund. It's in honor of Mom. So Dad planned this ahead of time. He did, Valerie was furious. He planned it all while we thought he was a helpless old man. He tricked us. Maybe we underestimated him. Underestimated him. He stole millions from us. Literally stole it. You were supposed to inherit it. Valerie paced the kitchen, unable to believe what had happened. All her plans, all her hopes for a better life, were gone overnight. Instead of a $100 million inheritance, they had a don't look note from an old man who had disappeared. We need to challenge the gift, she said firmly. Find a lawyer, prove he wasn't himself. Senile dementia, influence of strangers, whatever. Valerie, think about it. If Dad was able to make such a complicated deal, he must have been sane. The court will recognize that. Then we have to find him. Make him pay the money back. It's family property. David shook his head. He understood better than his wife what had happened. His father had heard them talking about the nursing home and had decided to act first. Smart, calculated, unemotional. Exactly what an experienced geologist used to making difficult decisions would do. He's not coming back, David said quietly, and he's not going to give the money back. He made his choice. Choice? Valerie stopped in front of her husband. He chose to take revenge on us, to take away our children's future, to ruin our plans, or he chose to use his money as he saw fit. That is his right. Whose side are you on? Valerie looked at her husband with indignation. Are you defending him? After what he did to us? David didn't answer. Deep down, he understood his father. Hearing your own family planning to get rid of you, calling you a useless old man, was painful. Perhaps his father was just protecting his dignity the only way he could. That evening at dinner, the children learned the news. Tyler listened to his parents' explanation and shrugged. So Grandpa was rich? That's cool. Why did he give the money to the university? Maharnat, because he went crazy, Valerie said angrily. Mom, will we find him? Emily asked. We'll try, although he obviously doesn't want to be found. The children took the news calmly. To them, Grandpa had always been just an old man in a chair with a book. That he turned out to be the owner of millions seemed unreal, like a movie plot. Late at night, Valerie sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, researching information about land in Georgia. She was looking for ways to challenge the donation, loopholes in the law, precedents for similar cases. David watched his wife and realized that she would not rest until she had exhausted all possibilities. Maybe that's enough for today, he said. We'll know more in the morning. No. Valerie kept her eyes on the screen. Cherie, I won't let him get away with this. It's our money, and I'll pay him back. But David knew it was too late. His father had disappeared. The plot had been donated. The deeds had been drawn up. The useless old man was smarter than all of them put together. And now all the family had to do was live with the consequences of their own plans. The next day, Valerie was on the phone first thing in the morning. She found 3 lawyers on the internet, specializing in inheritance disputes, and pressed for an urgent consultation. The first lawyer could not accept them until 2 weeks later. The second would not take on such cases at all. The third, Michael Rosenberg from Orlando, agreed to meet this afternoon. David took time off work, so they drove to the lawyer's office together. Rosenberg's office was located in an upscale neighborhood on the top floor of a modern building. The receptionist ushered them into the office of an imposing middle-aged man with attentive eyes. Valerie presented the situation emotionally, waving her arms and raising her voice. David supplemented the story with details, showed the letter from the university. Rosenberg listened in silence, occasionally making notes on the paper. I understand your situation, he said when they had finished, but I must warn you at once, to challenge the gift will be very difficult, especially if it's done properly. But he was clearly not himself, Valerie exclaimed. Who in his right mind gives $100 million to strangers? First of all, the university is not strangers to the professor. Second, philanthropy in itself is not a sign of incapacity. Rosenberg explained that to revoke a gift, one of several conditions must be proven: incapacity of the donor at the time of the transaction, duress, fraud, or material mistake. Mere disagreement by heirs is not grounds for a challenge. What about age? David asked. He is 75 years old. Age alone does not deprive one of capacity. If your father could walk on his own, make decisions, communicate with people, then the court will recognize him as capable. But we can try, Valerie insisted. You can, but the chances of success are minimal, especially given that the gift is in favor of the educational institution. Courts are very reluctant to overturn charitable donations. Rosenberg's quote for his services: $50,000 for the case plus court costs. The money was to be paid up front, with no guarantee of a favorable outcome. $50,000? Valerie turned pale. That's a lot of money. Inheritance disputes are expensive, especially when it comes to sums in the hundreds of millions. At home, they discussed the meeting with the lawyer for a long time. Valerie was ready to spend any money to get the property back. David was skeptical. The odds were too slim for such a large outlay. We can't just give up, Valerie said. This is our future, our children's future. What if we lose? We'll have wasted $50,000, and the university will still have the lot. And if we win, we get $120 million. They argued late into the night, but they didn't make a decision. Valerie wanted to fight. David doubted the expediency of the fight. In the morning, new information came in. The private detective Valerie had hired to look for him had found the trail. Charles Bradshaw was renting an apartment in Key Largo under his real name. Address, phone number, even a lifestyle description. The detective worked diligently. Found him, Valerie happily informed her husband. Lives in the Florida Keys, rents an apartment by the ocean. He has a phone number. She immediately dialed the number but heard the answering machine. The number is temporarily unavailable. She tried several more times during the day. Same result. He must have disconnected the phone, David suggested, or changed his number. He knows what we'll be looking for. The detective confirmed his suspicions. A double check revealed that Charles had indeed changed his phone number 2 days ago. The new number was registered under a different name and was hard to find. He's hiding on purpose, Valerie said angrily. He knows we want to talk to him, and he's avoiding contact. Or maybe he just wants some peace, David said cautiously. What peace? He stole millions from us. We have the right to demand an explanation. Valerie decided to go to Key Largo in person. If she couldn't get through, she would talk face to face. David reluctantly agreed to accompany his wife. A weekend trip was not in his plans. They left early Saturday morning. The drive to Key Largo took about 4 hours. Valerie spent the entire trip rehearsing the speech she would give David's father. Recriminations, demands, threats of lawsuits all blended into an angry tirade. What are you going to say to him? David asked as they entered the Florida Keys. The truth. That what he did was despicable. That he robbed his grandchildren of a future. That we will never forgive him for this betrayal. What if he won't listen? He will. I'm not leaving until he explains why he did it. The apartment I rented was in a small 2-story building near the beach. The landlady, an elderly woman named Rosa, greeted them friendly. Are you here to see Mr. Bradshaw? She asked. He's on the beach now. He sits there every day at this time with a book. Valerie and David walked to the beach. A small cove with white sand, a few palm trees, a wooden bench by the water. On the bench sat a man in a light-colored shirt, reading a book. Even from the back it was clear. It was me. Valerie walked determinedly toward the bench, David following. I heard footsteps on the sand, turned around and saw them. There was no surprise or joy on my face. Just a calm acceptance of the inevitable. We found it, I said without emotion. Yes, we found it, Valerie replied. And now you're going to explain to us what's going on. I closed the book and looked at them carefully. Valerie looked excited. David looked confused. Both were clearly preparing for a serious conversation. Have a seat, I said, pointing to the sand next to the bench. Let's talk. We got a letter from the university, Valerie began without preamble. About your endowment, $120 million. Explain what that means. It means I donated my land to the university. Isn't that clear? It's not clear why. Valerie raised his voice. Why didn't you consult your family? Why didn't you think about your grandchildren? I looked carefully at my daughter-in-law, then at my son. Did you consult me when you were planning to send me to a nursing home? Did you think about my feelings? David lowered his eyes. Valerie was confused for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. That's another matter. We cared about your well-being. Were you? I chuckled. Or did you care about your own comfort? We wanted the best for you. You'd be looked after in a nursing home. You'd be among people your own age. Among the same useless old people? Valerie flinched. She realized I'd heard that conversation. You were eavesdropping, sitting in the living room with a book. You were talking quite loudly. There was an awkward silence. The waves rustled softly on the sand. Seagulls cried somewhere in the distance. A peaceful picture, which was disturbed by the presence of people who had come with claims. Okay, Valerie said at last. We were wrong about that. But that's no reason to disinherit the family. Inheritance? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting. So you already considered my money yours. We are your family. It's only natural that the estate should go to us. Should? By what right? Valerie stammered. She hadn't expected me to have to explain the obvious. By right of inheritance. David is your son. Your children are your grandchildren. And that gives you the right to plan my life? Call me a burden? To discuss the quickest way to get rid of me? David finally spoke. Dad, we're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't. I looked at my son. Then why were you discussing nursing homes? Why were you planning to use my money to buy a new house? We were thinking about the future of the family. Your future, not mine. The conversation had reached a dead end. Valerie realized that apologizing wasn't going to help, so she turned to threats. We'll challenge the gift in court. We have a lawyer. Good luck to you, I calmly replied. Just take into account, all the documents are correct. There are enough witnesses. I was in my right mind and strong memory. We will prove that you were forced. Who forced me? The university? I laughed. Awkward. They didn't even know the station existed until I called. Valerie realized he was bluffing. It would be really hard to contest the gift. You're getting back at us, she said accusingly. Just revenge for a few unfortunate words. I'm not. Just disposing of my property as I see fit. That's my right. And our rights? Our grandchildren's rights? What rights? To my estate during my lifetime? There are no such rights. David stood up from the sand, shaking off his clothes. Dad, why don't you come home? We can talk about this calmly. Home? I looked at my son with surprise. I have a different home now. Here, by the ocean. But it's only temporary. No, David, it's permanent. I'm not coming back to your house. Why not? We're family. Family. I got up from the bench. Family doesn't plan to get rid of relatives. A family doesn't call them useless. Family doesn't consider them a burden. Valerie and David stood side by side, not knowing what to say. All the arguments had been exhausted. All the cards were open. What do we do now? David asked quietly. Live our own lives. Without me. Isn't that what you wanted? I picked up the book and headed for the house. Valerie called out to me. We won't give up. We will fight to the end. Fight, I said without turning around. It's your right, just as I had the right to do with my property as I saw fit. They left the same day with nothing. Rosa told me later that the woman was crying in the car and the man looked confused. Their big plans had fallen apart. Their dreams of a new home and a better life had evaporated. In the evening, I sat on the terrace of my apartment, reading the same book I had read that morning on the beach. The sun was slowly setting into the ocean, coloring the sky with pink and gold tones. A warm breeze moved the pages of the book. Quiet music from a nearby cafe was playing somewhere. I was calm, for the first time in years, truly calm. No one was making plans for my future. No one was counting my days or waiting for me to die to inherit. No one called me a burden. Tomorrow will be a new day, just as peaceful and measured. I'll get up, make breakfast, take a walk on the beach, read a book. Simple pleasures I lacked in a house where I was tolerated out of a sense of duty. Money would run out in a few months, but that didn't scare me. I had lived a long life, seen a lot, done what I thought was right. The Georgia plot would benefit young scientists. The Ellen scholarships would help hundreds of students. It was better than leaving millions to people who thought I was dead weight. The sun touched the horizon and the sky flashed the last colors of the day. I closed the book and leaned back in my chair, watching the day give way to night. In this change of day and night, in the sound of the surf, in the warm breeze, there was a simple truth. Life goes on, regardless of the plans and ambitions of those who want to control it.